There are moments in the life of an institution when the private record finally catches up with the public performance, when the carefully managed silence of years collapses into a single, documented sentence. This is one of those moments. A new book by veteran royal biographer Tom Bower, titled Betrayal, Power, Deceit, and the Fight for the Future of the Royal Family, published just days ago, has placed on the record something that palace insiders have circled around for more than 2 years. On the morning of September 8, 2022, the day Queen Elizabeth II took her final breaths at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, Meghan Markle was told, directly and without ambiguity, that she was not welcome. Not at the castle, not at the deathbed, not in that moment of national grief. The instruction came from King Charles himself. That single fact, now committed to print, is not merely a piece of royal gossip. It is a document of rupture. A formal record of how far a relationship had deteriorated, not between two individuals, but between a woman who had arrived in the royal family with global goodwill and an institution that had, by the end, decided she did not belong at its most sacred moment. And understanding why it happened requires going back much further than the morning the call was made. When Charles received word that his mother was critically ill, he acted immediately. He boarded a helicopter and flew north to Balmoral, the castle Queen Elizabeth had loved above almost any other place on earth, the private retreat where she had spent her final weeks, the place she had chosen to die. He telephoned both his sons. The instruction was practical and clear. Reach Northolt Airport in West London, where a jet would be waiting. William departed without hesitation. Harry and Meghan, at Frogmore Cottage in Windsor, deliberated. And when Charles was informed that Meghan intended to make the journey north alongside her husband, his reaction was immediate and unambiguous. He called Harry. "That was unacceptable," said Charles. The word unacceptable is doing enormous work in that sentence. This was not a logistical objection. It was not a question of space on the aircraft, of protocol, of who is technically permitted to be present at a royal deathbed. It was a judgment, accumulated, considered, and apparently long held, delivered in real time while a 96-year-old woman was dying 2 hours away by air. The reason Bower offers is specific and difficult to dismiss on procedural grounds. Meghan had refused the Queen's invitations to Balmoral during her lifetime. That refusal, whether once, whether twice, whether framed as scheduling conflict or personal discomfort or the demands of a young family, had been noted. And in Charles's reckoning, a woman who had declined to visit the monarch while she lived had no standing to claim presence at her death. Bower puts the logic bluntly. Since Meghan had refused the Queen's invitations to Balmoral in the Queen's lifetime, then she was unwelcome at her death. But Charles went further. Sharing his grief with Meghan, who had maligned the monarchy, was unthinkable. And, Bower adds, Charles believed that to her dying day, his mother had been shocked by Harry's disloyalty. Now read that again slowly. Not merely disappointed, not merely hurt, shocked by her grandson, by the boy who had walked behind her husband's coffin in April of 2021, whose face had carried the particular exhaustion of someone fighting grief and estrangement simultaneously. Shocked, as in, the behaviour had exceeded what she had thought her family capable of, as in, it had registered as a kind of betrayal that the 95-year reign of her emotional composure could not fully absorb. If Bower's account is accurate, then the Queen herself never made peace with what had happened. She received Harry and Meghan publicly, attended their son Archie's christening, maintained the outward posture of family. But privately, according to this account, the wound had never closed. It had simply been managed, as the Windsors manage everything, through discipline, silence, and the performance of institutional normalcy. To understand the full weight of Balmoral as a setting, you have to understand what Balmoral represented to Elizabeth. This was not Buckingham Palace, which belongs to the nation. This was not Windsor Castle, which is almost medieval in its symbolic formality. Balmoral was personal. It was the place she retreated to every August and September, away from state papers and state dinners and the relentless machinery of constitutional monarchy. It was where she walked with her corgis in the morning, where she wore wellies and a headscarf and looked, at least briefly, like an ordinary grandmother in an extraordinary landscape. It was her place of real rest, and she had chosen it as the place to die. The Sussexes had never been there, not once during Meghan's time as a working royal. Reports surfaced in 2019 suggesting that the couple skipped the traditional August visit because Archie was only 4 months old, a plausible enough explanation for a first-time mother. But the explanation was never confirmed. And in 2020 and 2021, as the rupture widened, the visits that might have repaired things never materialized. Every year the plane to Aberdeen was not booked was, in the eyes of the family they were leaving behind, a small additional piece of evidence. Evidence of what, exactly, remained unsaid, but evidence nonetheless. Harry was, by Bower's account, outraged by his father's refusal. The confrontation between father and son, held by telephone in the hours before the Queen's death was formally announced, would have been, by any measure, one of the most charged exchanges of their fractured relationship. Charles, anticipating the accusation of targeting his daughter-in-law, offered a counter-argument that was revealing in its precision. Kate would not be coming either, he said. Meghan had not been singled out. The deathbed was for the core, and the core at that moment meant the direct line of succession. It is worth pausing on this moment because it tells you something about how Charles thinks about the monarchy. He was not acting from personal animus alone, though personal animus may well have been present. He was acting from institutional logic. The House of Windsor, at its most serious, has always distinguished between those who belong to it and those who have married into it, particularly those who have, in the family's view, used that membership against it. Meghan had given the Oprah interview in March 2021, 18 months before the Queen's death. She had spoken of an unnamed royal raising concerns about Archie's skin colour. She had described suicidal thoughts and institutional indifference. Whatever the truth of those claims, the family had experienced them as a detonation. Charles was drawing the circle tighter in the only moment when circle drawing could not be deferred. Then came William. He had been waiting at the airport. He had heard, presumably, that there was an argument, and William ordered the plane to take off. Harry, still on the phone with his father, still furious, discovered that his brother had not waited. On the day their grandmother was dying, the two princes who had once shared a childhood defined by loss, who had walked behind their mother's coffin in 1997 when Harry was 12 years old and William was 15, could no longer even coordinate a departure. They had, in the most literal sense, taken different planes. Harry flew to Aberdeen alone. He arrived after the Queen had died. He never had the chance to say goodbye. The Sussexes' public response to Bower's book was swift and categorical. A spokesperson described him as someone whose commentary had long crossed the line from criticism into fixation, citing a statement in which Bower had said, "The monarchy depends on obliterating the Sussexes from public life." The statement accused him of constructing elaborate theories about people he has never met and directed those seeking facts elsewhere. It was the kind of rebuttal that is legally careful and emotionally maximalist. Attack the author, impugn the motive, redirect attention. What it was not was a denial of the specific events Bower describes. No statement said, Charles did not call Harry. No statement said, Meghan was welcome. No statement addressed the word unacceptable. That absence is significant. In 3 years of dispute, legal proceedings, documentary confessions, and memoir, the Sussexes have contested many specific claims. They have filed lawsuits. They have corrected the record. What they have not done, in response to this book, is deny the central sequence of events. The phone call, the word, the departure of a plane that did not wait. And so what Bauer's book has accomplished, whatever one thinks of the author, whatever one thinks of his politics or his record, is the reduction of a long, complex, media-saturated estrangement to a single, irreducible scene. A dying queen, a castle in Scotland, a telephone, a son calling a son, an instruction delivered in plain language, and a woman, famous across the world, the subject of a global cultural argument, branded and documented and streamed into hundreds of millions of homes, told that she was not welcome in the room where history was ending. That scene now exists in the permanent record. Not in a Netflix series, not in a memoir shaped by publicists and approved by lawyers, in a book under a name, with sources attributed. And the palace has not contradicted it. There is a version of events in which Meghan Markle arrived in the British royal family in 2018 as something genuinely new, modern, American, biracial, independent, unwilling to simply dissolve into the institution's expectations. That version is not entirely wrong. But there is another version, now documented, in which the choices made over 4 years, the refusals, the interviews, the departures, the monetizations, produced a consequence that no amount of narrative management can fully rewrite. On September 8, 2022, when it mattered most, the door was closed. And the person who closed it was not a tabloid editor. It was the king. What they built in those 4 years between the wedding and the Queen's death was, depending on your perspective, an act of liberation or an act of destruction. What September 8th confirms is that the institution had made its own judgment, quietly, finally, and in the worst possible hour. That judgment was not softened by sympathy. It was not deferred by protocol. It was delivered in a single word: unacceptable.